They say that to domesticate an animal, you take them away from their family, put them in an enclosed space, and give them a specific reward and punishment system to comply, which is what happens in schools. So the revolution here is just to really understand that like this industrial model of, if I do this, if I teach you this, you will learn that. And I know it because I assess you on this test, which is like a machine, which is what we do with a conveyor belt. It's very Newtonian. It's like it's cause and effect. It is a misunderstanding of how we are as life, which we are always growing, and it's all contextual. Everything is a unique experience. Again, going back to maybe the Tao, going back to this idea of Buddhism, like all these ancient wisdoms that are so connected, going back to the cosmology, the cosmogony of First Nations. We are the world, and we have to approach it perhaps with a set of ethics that open space for all life to thrive. And it's those ethics that we have to care for. And we have to think about, and this is where I think it gets really tricky. I think about what you do with the biochar, taking the plastic. Those are ways of working that in between, finding ways of designing that actually work with nature, bring back a more regenerative approach. That's really cool. Nobody's asking to not use plastics anymore. We just rethink the way we use it in more regenerative ways. And, the system doesn't want you to do that. They don't want that. They want you to act with impulse and go buy stuff and not think. And go back to our education system. What interest is it of the powers that be that we have people who can think like this? I do think, and I'm very serious about this, and we talked about the breakdown of the nation state, that what we will end up doing fundamentally is restructuring our system of production, logistics, consumption. I have huge issues with the SDGs, and I'll say that unabashedly. There was no way, I'll put money on the table, there's no way any of those goals is going to be met in 2030. And I'll even say this.
So I'm really excited to sit down with you.
Thank you.
I've learned about your work. I've had a great time researching and listening to your podcast, Coconut Thinking Podcast. And I'm excited to dive into some deep topics. I've been really interested in education for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as one of the highest leverage opportunities to really make an impact on the world. And my personal experience with education was lots of the old style. I did get a chance to go to a pretty good school in Austin, Texas. But yeah, it was very much geared toward getting into a good university.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky we were taught critical thinking and things like that and rhetoric. But I'm really curious to hear your experience on the cutting edge of education, teaching kids more ancient wisdom
Mm-hmm.
and in a new fashion. Are there any effects you see of kind of a revolutionary teaching style as students go out into the world and experience kind of the normal paradigm that the world is in, and maybe experiencing international schools where people weren't taught the same practices as them, they're in different headspace? Are you seeing any negative effects or kind of harsh contrast that the students experience?
No, very good questions. And I guess the first piece is just to separate education from learning. And I think that we found with COVID, actually, the crisis is kids being indoors. And we've noticed this as a pattern that kids really have always learned at least as much outside of school than they have inside of school, maybe from a socio-emotional point of view, or how to find the courage to, run across a riverbed or whatever it might be, or just what they teach themselves when they play Minecraft, things like that. So the education piece is really an institutionalization of outcomes. The learning happens connected to that institutionalization, but the learning happens within us. Education is just it's a delivery mechanism. Education in schools, a little bit different, but similar concepts. And someone that I quite admire and who's been on the podcast, Gary Steger, said that schools are nothing more than content delivery and animal control, because of the way that we move people in different classes. They're in boxes. The same people in the United States who make these schools are the same architects who make prisons and things like that.
Yeah, the bell rings, everyone shuffles out into
That's right.
the room.
That's right. They say that to domesticate an animal, you take them away from their family, put them in an enclosed space, and give them a specific reward and punishment system to comply, which is what happens in schools. So the idea of learning being different from education is really, I'm certainly not the first one to make that distinction, but it's one to remember. So what do we do in terms of these? The revolution isn't really revolution. It's going back to what's always been there. In many languages of First Nations people, teaching and learning are the same word, because I teach and learn. It's a process, an oscillating process that you do together. I may impart something that you were going to learn from. In fact, you're going to learn from everything. Yeah, we're always learning as our cells and our body on a physiological level. We're always learning. We have to rethink what learning means, right? But so we go through an experience. I may do something that you learn from, whatever that is. And at the same time, because we're in contact and we're connected, the way you are teaches me at the same time. I'm learning from you. Right now, your disposition, your physiological disposition is giving me signals that disturb me. And by disturb, I mean like creates affect within myself. And I'm adjusting what I'm saying based on our connection. And therefore, I'm learning from it and adjusting what I'm saying based on that. And that's an experience that I will, even at the most infinitesimal level, subconsciously, take into my next experience. So there's no real difference between teaching and learning. So the revolution here is just to really understand that teaching, like this industrial model of, if I do this, if I teach you this, you will learn that. And I know it because I assess you on this test, which is like a machine, which is what we do when we do a conveyor belt. It's very Newtonian. It's like, it's cause and effect. It is a misunderstanding of how we are as life, which we are always growing, and it's all contextual. Everything is a unique experience, and you cannot replicate learning. You can't even replicate experiences. It's just going back to something we've been doing since Homo sapiens, probably even Homo erectus at the end of the day. Even maybe before that, I mean, nature's always been learning since monocellular organisms.
Do you think that we're in a phase of the civilization that is the end of a cycle? There's many kind of foreshadowings, timelines of human history, that maybe there were civilizations before us, and that they kind of came to the end of their civilization around the same time that we are in this stage of the cycle. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny you say that. I just finished a book by Jeremy Rifkin called The Age of Resilience. And he says that we're moving away from this age of progress to this age of resilience. This age of progress being like efficiency and measurements and things like that, towards more of a nature-connected sense of resilience. And resilience isn't going through something and bouncing back and being exactly the way you are, but it's about being able to be stretched, and you always change within that stretch, but probably finding some kind of harmony within yourself. And then there's also adaptation and transformation there. Are we on the brink of civilizational change? I mean, that's what people are talking about. It's very possible. And capitalism is not something that can forever exist. As a historian, I see a long-term in terms of history, and capitalism is very resilient, but it changes. And we're on the verge of ecological breakdown in biodiversity. It's a catastrophe right now and breaking down. We are committing ecocide in terms of what we do to the natural world. On a human level, and I'm not making a distinction between nature and humans. Humanity is embedded within nature, if to make that cut. There are so many strains in terms of the political system. I mean, we might be on the verge of civil war. People talk about it in the United States. Regional and political polarization is so intense. Maybe it's the end of the state as we know it, which again has only been around since 1555 or 1648. Blah blah. The state might disintegrate. We might be in terms of these bioregions where people tend to kind of align politically the same way, in many communities. It's a big generalization, but maybe that might be the switch. The challenge is that in our echo chamber, we think, sustainability, natural world, but you just got to look at the numbers of who some of the more popular politicians are, in the United States and in Netherlands and France, to know that it's not that easy. So it's going to hurt. The problem is, I think the big problem is, one, people don't realize that civilizations, as you mentioned, rise and fall, that history is a flow. It's like, this isn't always the way it's been, and it will change again. And I think that the other thing to remember, and this is probably the more frightening one, is that we are so used to living in this Hollywood trope that someone's going to save us and it's going to come out okay in the end. It might not. It might be really, really bad before it gets worse. Because it ain't no Hollywood movie.
Yeah, most of our generation hasn't lived through anything close to the horrors of the history. So I guess you're charged with preparing the next generation for potentially one of the most challenging periods that we've seen for quite a while. How do you instill them with the courage and the resilience to face these things without a lot of the fear that's inherent in it? Like it is frightening, and we're faced with these terms of crisis and things. How do you keep people from wanting to just go off and get a homestay and live off the land and separate themselves from all of that, which is, everyone did it, would solve a lot of problems, but at the same time, we're faced with a lot of structure built into civilization that needs our help in lots of ways to transition.
I love literature. And as a historian, I don't think you can understand history without getting a feel in literature, and vice versa. You can't understand literature without getting a feel in history. And one of the literatures I love is 19th century Russian literature. And I think of Turgenev and Fathers and Son, which was a whole generational shift. And if you read these periodic pieces of history, there's always generational tension of, things are changing. Things are, Edith Wharton also, Age of Innocence is about generational shift. There's always been these tropes. Now it's not just about the changing norms and values within civilization, within generations. It's about a bigger ecological piece. However, the crises of the 30s in Europe was also pretty intense, and it led to, how many 50, 70 million dead, across World War II and all these horrific events. So I don't think as a humanity, we look at the Black Death that led to a third of Europe going down, and Spanish flu in 1818, 50 million deaths as well. So as a species, we've gone through these crisis points. I think this is just the first time where we're going to take other species down with us. And we tend to think of, all these words that are coming out with people with great intentions, talk about human-centered design. We need to do this for human. But that's the problem. That's really the problem, is we're still thinking about human-centered when we have to think about it more in terms of ecocentrism, pluricentrism of life, because we are connected to all life. And that's where we're in the situation. Extracting fossil fuels might make it that we have air conditioning and it's great. Oh, wonderful. But it creates a lot of environmental damage. So how do we not instill fear in kids? It's a big question. And I am torn with that. And part of me wants to think that it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to find it unacceptable to be in this world, because we take that rage and we channel it for good. Not destruction, unless the destruction leads to productivity. That's something else we could talk about, productive destruction, which again, in the cycle of life, everything is destroyed to bring about new life. So we shouldn't be afraid to destroy, but I'm talking needless, mean destruction, which is a very simplistic way. So, Donna Haraway, a posthumous, talks about sitting with the trouble, being there and saying, this is crap. Sit with it. Let's not be fooled by hope. Hope is dangerous. Let's sit with the fact that it sucks. Let's sit with the fact that there's violence and racism. Let's feel that and take that energy and those feelings and channel it to want to improve our lot or respond to the world in different ways. We're so geared towards this, like, hope and avoiding ego anxiety. Yeah, it can go into this terrible place, but sometimes that rage is what is necessary. And I'll finish it by circling back to Russian literature. When you think of Dostoevsky and the devil and he wrote about nihilism and so forth, that's been around forever. But Nietzsche's nihilism isn't about the world sucks. It's about we have to create our own morality. And that is what we do. And our morality, our ethics are what we are guided by. And that might just mean doing everything we can so all life thrives. But we're not going to accept the old morality. That's really what nihilism is. So maybe that's what we do. Brush away everything else. We're going to set up our own ethics and move forward. That's what I think the world needs right now.
You've spoken about the very anthropomorphic view that we have of the world, how important it is to reconnect with nature. I think there's a balance to be found of appreciating human consciousness as perhaps special or perhaps what this is all for, but we also we can't disconnect, we can't use that as an excuse to subjugate the planet. I think if we had a choice between stopping all fossil fuel use to save thousands of species, but at the same time, millions of people would die because they wouldn't have access to energy to get them around, and socioeconomic issues with that. How do you balance anthropomorphism with connecting to the natural world?
So anthropocentrism, rather than, so the both are really connected in so many ways, but I'm going to focus on the anthropocentric piece of it, of really putting humans at the center of everything. But also, if we rethink about it, it's like a pyramid, like humans are on top. So human consciousness is very special, but so are the trees. So is the fact that trees talk to one another and are the life source of everything. So are the fact that you look at an aspen, the largest form of life in the world is an aspen grove. It's one tree, and there's hundreds, thousands. It's also the oldest. So I don't think it's an either or in terms of fossil fuels or saving nature. Moving away from that binary is probably the first step. We can probably have both. It would be not wise of me to say, it's okay, millions will die and we need to move on with that. That's not wise. It's not skillful. Over the longer term, though, those millions might die anyway. I mean, and generally with the extraction of fossil fuels, it's poor people in the global south. Let's face it, they're the ones who really suffer. And then there's a whole conversation about sustainability being really a global north conversation, not a global south conversation. So humans are special, but so is all life. And that's where the pluricentrism comes from, is that we can look at all forms of life. But it comes from an ontological perspective that you as a human are only a human because we decide to call you a human. The word species, and specific are the same thing. That's something that comes from the the scientific revolution. This categorization of human. But we're much more than that. We're mammals, again, a categorization, but we're also life. And you as a human, it's not where our skin ends. There's 2 to 10 times more little critters that make you alive. You got bacteria on your feet, and your feet smell when they sweat, and they're meant to sweat because the bacteria eats other bacteria. In your body, there's a whole bunch of viruses that allow you to live, because viruses, we think of bad things, but actually there's a lot of good viruses. Your DNA has viruses in it. Your humanity is only human because you decided it's human, because that's how we compartmentalize the world. In your eyebrows, you got little bugs. In your digestive system, you got little bugs. In fact, your digestive system technically is outside your body. So how are we with this? What about the air, the oxygen that we're breathing? We are probably, statistically speaking, inhaling the same oxygen that Cleopatra inhaled, because it's still an atom of oxygen. It's still all that, the water that we have in our bodies and so forth. So human is something that has come out of the last 400 or 500 years from Western scientific tradition. But we are life, an incarnation of life. And when you die and you go in the air and the ground, whatever, you are another incarnation of life. And that goes back to the reality of ecology, but also ancient wisdoms, and also quantum physics, that there is nothing that separates us. We are all entangled. Every atom in the universe is entangled with every other atom because we came from the Big Bang. So I think I'm very afraid of saying that humans are special because of the consciousness. I'm very afraid of that, because that also is the same mentality that says, but white people are superior. Look at everything that we've done. That leads to a hierarchization of nature, but also humans. It's the same mentality. We are better because we're white. We are better because we come from a region. Same thing. There's no difference. We are better because we're men. The separation between man and woman is the same separation that happened a lot at the same time as between human and nature. And in fact, if you look at Francis Bacon, when he says he's going to extract nature's secrets, he refers to nature as female. So we have to be very careful of that whole narrative of special. Life is special.
Well, I guess it feels to me that one way of looking at what's happening in reality in this dimension is sort of a school. It's a place to face challenges and to grow and to learn, and for consciousness to experience itself and have a particular perception that can grow and evolve. There's no way of knowing what other forms of life, what they're experiencing. But it feels like humans are faced with a unique set of challenges based on our capacity to feel and to understand things. Yeah, what's your take on what's happening in life and why we're here in physical form, and if other forms of life, like you mentioned, it can be hierarchical. They're completely a part of us. There's no separation. There are different sides of us. How do we design a world that is most in line with what we're here to do?
How do we design a world? And I wonder if the question, again, ontologically, gives us a little bit of that Western view that we are designing a world and it separates us from the world. Whereas we're not here to design a world. We approach the world as the world. Not to quote a cheesy song from the 1980s, but we are the world. We are entangled in the world. So we don't design the world. We respond to the world, and the world responds to us, and the world kicks back. As Kieran Barad would say, the world kicks back because we can extract, but the world, Mother Nature is going to win. Let's face it. Mother Nature is going to win. We can do all these things, but at the end of the day, she's going to say, it's over. You know, we've got typhoons, hurricanes, all this. We're like, we don't design the world because we don't have that ability to control. And I think that approach of relinquishing control, again, going back to maybe the Tao, going back to this idea of Buddhism, like all these ancient wisdoms that are so connected, going back to the cosmology, the cosmogony of First Nations, you know, we are the world, and we have to approach it perhaps with a set of ethics that open space for all life to thrive. And maybe that's the difference that we as humans have, just like octopi have their own differences, trees, mushrooms, whatever, is that we have ethics that other life forms might not have, as far as we know. And it's those ethics that we have to care for. And we have to think about, and this is where I think it gets really tricky, we have to think about ethics not as an inclusive process, but a process of exclusion. Because the decisions that we make, or the way we approach life, is about what we decide not to do, whose voices we decide not to include, what are the things we decide to forego. It's that ethics piece that we have to work on. And how we approach every moment, how we approach these relationships. And that's why I wonder, going back to schools, if the ethics of schools, and this goes back to Aristotle and all these complicated things that frankly, you know, I can't solve, you know, 2,500 years worth of problems, right? But I wonder if it's the ethics piece that we need to think about, and what would it take to live as life to allow all life to thrive. And that's really the fundamental, because if you, and not in a utilitarian point, but what might that mean? We're all in this together. I mean, I'm not here to proselytize, but just opening up those spaces for conversation.
Yeah. No, I can tell you've thought about these things a lot, so it's great to hear your voice on this. I like the idea of subtractive models of what can we do less. That goes hand in hand with kind of unlearning the conditioning of the past. And when I think about this, I think the bottom-up approach makes so much sense. Let's just educate the next generation, create a nucleus of a new way of living, a new way of thinking. But at the same time, all the structures that are in place, can we use the same approach out of those, or do we have to meet it with the same way that it was built and sort of deconstruct it?
Right.
Maybe there's a form of design that has to go into that. So,
yeah, that's right. I mean, these words design, again, are words that we use as vehicles for ideas, but the word design means different things in different ways. Like design, we could still use the same word, but have different intentions and meanings towards it. And what might we design? Because at the end of the day, we are designing, but maybe it's the intention of humility or appreciation that we're not a god or a watchmaker in space. So those are very, again, we approach those words with care. I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say, let's just sweep it all aside and start over, but that's just never going to happen. Unless there's a massive cataclysm, which, it might be when you talked earlier about people going off and doing their own thing, and maybe those become communities. Maybe that's a direction. The structures that we have in education, there's so much good in it, but geez, there's so much hurt, competition. I mean, it's been said 1,000 times, all the things that are extractive about education. So we think about more regenerative frameworks, and even frameworks not a great word, but regenerative approaches to education, about how we use that idea of, like the seasons. Spring, it's born, it has summer, then in fall you try to see other things, and winter, it's that creative destruction. Those are the principles, that's probably a better word than framework, those principles that are quite attractive, of appreciating that we don't learn linearly, we learn in these cycles, where there's going to be this constant growth and at the same time creative destruction, so that what we perhaps held as different ways of doing things, or ideas, or our skills, are creatively destroyed in order for new ones to come out. I learned from you some of my notions that I came into this room with, because you give me things to think about with your questions, are destroyed, but that gives the ground for more growth. I don't know if I'm answering your question right, but I can't see us sweeping everything aside. I mean, that's just, I can't see us hope that the current system will just kind of magically sort itself out. So it's going to have to be somewhere in the in-between.
Yeah, it's this paradox of surrender versus, structure, taking action. And there has to be sort of a surrender to how things are, but also massive implementation, all the way up to policy change and infrastructure that needs to be developed to meet the massive civilizational challenges that we have.
I think about what you do with the biochar, taking the plastics. Now, plastics are a fantastic thing. Sometimes they're not, right? I mean, and it's not a binary there. It's everything's got feedback loops that take us to where we are. But if you're able to take what you do with biochars and the plastics and put it back in the earth in ways that allow all life to thrive and are good, good, for the environment, to generalize, those are ways of working that in between. You're not destroying a system of life. We're not living as back a few million years, but at the same time, we're taking what we have and finding ways of designing that actually work with nature, hopefully, or bring back a more regenerative approach. That's really cool. Nobody's asking to not use plastics anymore. We just rethink the way we use it in more regenerative ways.
Cool. Yeah, I love the parallel between the philosophical and the material. And that's kind of what gave me a big light bulb moment with focusing on plastics, is we can kind of transmute these plastics into something that's beneficial and regenerative. Like thinking back to ancient wisdoms and the schools of thought back to the ancient Greeks and even before, how do we find a new form of these ancient teachings that meets the world where it is today? How do you think about integrating this kind of cutting edge philosophies into education?
I spoke to someone, so I'm not taking credit for this, because again, our ideas are not our own. We are all the products of, or the results of whatever. Those are terrible words. I get tongue-tied because all these words that we're used to using also guide us in a narrative. And if one of the things that's so important in changing the narratives is changing the words that we use, but old habits die hard.
Yeah.
So by stumbling over these words, I'm showing to myself how difficult it is to break that narrative. But someone told me that really we're looking at a third world, and it's not third world in the Cold War concept, but it's just thinking about the world of First Nations, ancient wisdoms, the modern world in all its European context, and taking both of them and kind of synthesizing them into a third world. Because First Nations people, and I'm not, as a white dude, I'm not talking on behalf of First Nations, right? This is just my perspective. But First Nations people understand the local context very well. They understand the local botany, the local, just the landscape of the local. As moderns, modern European tradition, we've got a pretty good view about the global context. But because we've been so displaced, you said you were in Texas, now you're here. I mean, I've moved around quite a bit. So we move a lot. And even if people stay in their original homes, they watch TV, and then they have connections across the world. They are in Japan when they do a Zoom call in Japan. They are in Japan when they watch a TV show in Japan. So there's that global piece. But if we take both and take the best of both, which is a generalization, a simplification, but you understand, that appreciation for nature in local bioregions, while at the same time appreciating some of the benefits that modern science and modern approaches have done, then maybe we can create that space. I do think, and I'm very serious about this, and we talked about the breakdown of the nation state, that what we will end up doing fundamentally is restructuring our system of production, logistics, consumption. We talk a lot about consumption, like, use, reuse, recycle. Some people say, well, hold on a second, why do I have to save plastics? It's actually the producer's job not to create plastics that I have to recycle in the first place. Totally makes sense to me. I mean, that makes sense. Like, why put it all on the consumer when actually it's the producers, the companies who should do something? I mean, it's both. But we also think about that logistics piece, about how to transport from point A to point B with a minimal carbon footprint, minimal disruption to life. So it's all part of this way of this social, civilizational economics piece that when you think about, and that means we're going to have to probably focus more on the bioregional piece. That might be having fewer efficiencies, because producing locally goes against comparative advantage, but we might have to do that. Maybe that's okay that we don't have a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe it's okay that we do better with less. And that's a whole other conversation about growth and consumption and linearity of GDP, blah, blah. But if we start to produce our food and our stuff locally, then we're really working with ourselves, our community, and our community is human and more than human community. And that might be where we take what we have and the new and bring those two together. And maybe with that, we'll connect a little bit more with our local landscapes and bring back those ancient wisdoms, bring back that slowing down. And I don't mean slowing down like breathing in yoga. I mean slowing down like appreciating, contextualizing. I can't see why that would be different. And I'll end this very long answer with something. This morning, I was talking to my wife, and we have this vegan. So fantastic. I love being vegan, or trying to be as vegan as I can. I'm not perfect by any stretch. Vegan Parmesan, it's fantastic. Save the and then I looked at the ingredients. They're made with almonds. What is it? 90% of almond production is in California, and that takes away all the water from the Colorado River, which means the peoples of the First Nations people in New Mexico don't get water. Like, I'm trying to be vegan, and I'm depriving people from water. And God knows how far those almonds have traveled. So, needless to say, it's complex.
Yeah. It was like, as soon as we solve one problem, we create another.
That's right. And whack-a-mole.
And with plastics, the countries that eliminate plastics, their carbon footprint skyrockets because the replacements are much more carbon intensive and heavier. Yeah, it's nonstop challenges, and being immersed in the sustainability and the environmental world, it's not free of the human tendency to latch on to a paradigm or a dogma and exclude all else. And it really limits holistic thinking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've talked a bit about the SDGs, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on, how do we balance the need for a very high level government policy thinking and change, and not get lost in the politics and the us versus them and the different sides of things. Because there's so much of that in the environmental world that might just be doing more harm than good. It's a necessary harm. Like, these things have to happen and be discussed. But yeah, how would you see things getting more streamlined in these areas? Just more open communication, more, lowering of boundaries between different political parties or schools of thought.
I think that it's going to be more than that. I think there's going to have to be people going out on the streets and really fighting a revolution for this. And I'm not afraid to say that, as somebody who is, as a historian, have studied revolution, it might come down to that. It might not be a revolution of, we see revolution, we have this narrative that's violent, it's destructive and all that. But at the same time, again, it's that creative destruction. There might have to be more. I know you talk about, not you, but just people talk about January 6th being an insurrection and all that. And I get that. But at the same time, when we have a COP where the head of the country is saying, questioning whether or not there's a scientific, I know it's more complicated than I'm just giving a soundbite, but there's no scientific evidence for fossil fuels, or that if you start to curb fossil fuels or go back to the cave ages, that's a problem. And I don't have any hope for COP right now. It's every year. This is it. Every year it's a disappointment because the politicians are in the pockets of big oil, big extraction. They're in the pockets of this narrative that GDP needs to grow, otherwise I won't get elected. They're in the pockets of this linearity in consumption. That whole scene is where we are. And if we hope for 1 second that the politicians are going to do anything, I think that's a very problematic avenue. So it might have to be more mass sit-ins, hopefully peaceful. No one wants to get hurt, but more demonstrations and more rising up. SDGs, I have huge issues with the SDGs, and I'll say that unabashedly. There was no way, I'll put money on the table, there's no way any of those goals is going to be met in 2030. And I'll even say this, even just framing them as goals is a problem, because they're not a goal, it's a journey. What's going to happen? Zero hunger, tick that box. It's a journey. The fact that out of those 17 goals, 14 of them are human based, only 3 of them are connect with nature. The fact that my personal favorite, quality education, the word nature doesn't appear once. It's nice to say, nature doesn't appear once. It's even putting in a little square boxes takes away this whole idea of systems thinking. And you can say, but we're focusing on a couple. No, it takes away the idea of systems thinking. Sustainable development is an oxymoron. Development is the problem. What if we have like responsible consumption on the little icon? It's going up. I have so many issues with the SDGs in terms of getting us out of there. Again, systems thinking, not regenerative. This idea of development goals is a problem. Even the idea of sustainability can be a problem in many ways. There's a lot of things we don't want to sustain. Zero hunger. It's simple enough to say we can make sure every human is not hungry on this planet. We can totally do that if we want to. It's a political reason why we don't. Why is it that in South Sudan, 7 million people have been displaced, 6 million on the verge of famine? Do we hear that anywhere? No. Do we hear the fact that in Madagascar, the last drought 2 years ago, people were eating bugs? No. I can venture why. Why is it that we don't hear about the Sudanese, 7 million? We hear so much about Ukraine. Ukraine's not okay. Russia and Ukraine have a war. That's not okay. Europeans don't do that. But if on the continent of Africa, we kind of expect it, don't we? Which is why it doesn't make the news. Terrible things are happening in Gaza and Israel. Terrible things. We're close to that. What about all the things that are going on right now in Congo, in Niger? Don't hear about that. So, Eritrea, all the ethnic cleansing there. Don't hear about that. So, I really have an issue with these SDGs, with this whole narrative. Like we have to connect more beyond our own race and our cultural narratives to humans, and then hopefully, again, that's an anthropocentric, but like connect with all these other things. Never mind ecocide. Sorry, I just got on a huge diatribe of just like on my soapbox going bam, 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 bam. But it's, again, SDGs, it's, people have great intentions. I just worry it's going to take us on the wrong path. And I'll go back again to this long diatribe to education. How is it acceptable that nature is not once mentioned in quality education, but what is emphasized is getting people for the workforce? Because again, SDGs, in my opinion, just it's a ramp way for capitalism to find a way to survive. And that's all it is. Nothing to do with sustainability. It's all about making sure people have enough money to buy stuff, enough education to contribute and be productive, enough responsible consumption or sustainable cities, which is again about the way we build things. It's all about lubricating capitalism survival. So I'm very cautious of those things.
Yeah, it's so important. Do you have any resources or groups that people can pay more attention to, other than this sort of a figurehead of the SDGs that give people something they think, okay, people are taking care of these issues, people are thinking about it, and they don't have to think about all these other horrors that are going on in the world. I think to actually look at what's going on in the world, the natural responses are either nihilism, there's no hope, or hedonism. You see all over the world, it's hopeless, so let's just enjoy life. Maybe I'll show that I care about things, but ultimately I just want a comfortable life where I'm taken care of because I'm going to die and the world's going to be, on its own.
That's the ethics of it. Sitting with the trouble and realizing that it's all crap is a difficult burden to bear. That's what gives us the energy to moment, try to say, all I can do is focus on my right now. So that person is ourselves. All I can do is focus on my right now. And if we are entangled, and if we think in fractals, that our relationship, if it's positive, because we're quantumly entangled with other life forms, that will reverberate out in the universe. That is a ripple that leads to a wave that will lead to a tsunami. All I can do is not trust some person over there. I can only do what I can do. And what we have are nurturing our relationship. That's what I can do. Not me, not you, nurturing what we have. And what we have, our relationship with the natural world, and every moment working on that. And if everybody does that, that will be so much. And it is easy to go into nihilism or hedonism, and that's the problem. That is the problem, and it's sitting in that trouble. And it's hard. It's the inner work as well. And I tell you, that's hard. But if it were easy, we'd all be running around. Hey, do this, and then it would have been fine, right? It's hard. That's why we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's such a good point of doing the inner work and starting with yourself, because it's not just bottom up when you do that. Mm-hmm. There is also the top down. There's the effect that has on the entire universe. Mm-hmm. But that's a tough sell to a lot of people because it's so far outside the paradigm that we're used to. And even myself, having really deep connection to that truth, often find myself questioning it. Like, is it really changing the world? Mm-hmm. Is there hope that way? But have you heard of spiral dynamics?
I haven't.
It's a model by a guy named Claire Graves, and based out of Boulder. And it's sort of a new way of integrating systems thinking with human psychology and cultural development. And it's kind of closely related to the chakra system in the human body as well. And there's these different stages that we all pass through, both as individuals and as cultures. And it kind of starts with survival mode and goes all the way up to recognizing the interconnectedness of everything, seeing the entire structure as one thing. And there's a hierarchy, but no one is better than the other. Mm-hmm. But often along the stages, we don't see that. We see our stage as the true one, and it's hard to see outside of that. Mm-hmm. So the bottom up approach would be, we need to help the world evolve is maybe not the best word, but to develop through these stages. But the other way of thinking is that if you can tap into the entire system, then the effect you can have on the whole system from operating at the top, where you're integrating and transcending all of it, has an outsized effect. So yeah, I love your points on that inner work and trusting that will reverberate out into everything else.
Totally makes sense what you said. I mean, like the picture you're painting resonates so well. And the system doesn't want you to do the inner work. They don't want that. They want you to act with impulse and go buy stuff and not think. And go back to our education system. what interest is it of the powers that be that we have people who can think like this? It would bring it down. There's absolutely no way the system benefits from having people who restrain consumption, get along with each other and love one another. It feeds on the lowest common denominator. And that's just what it is. You don't buy Coke if you actually know what you're drinking and think about it. You don't allow for these military budgets to pass no matter what. And in the United States, they say, yeah, but it's America, it's freedom and all that. Fine, yeah, sure. But if you want to spend $900 billion on the military, nobody questions that. But God forbid you should put it on healthcare. But actually, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but it's true. The U.S. military is the biggest form of socialism in the United States, probably the world. Think about it. If you live in Paris, Texas, you're paying taxes for the U.S. military, and you are taking that to defend the whole country from a terror, like let's say an attack on the United States. That would probably be more likely in New York or in L.A., not necessarily in Paris, Texas, but you're paying taxes to protect the United States against terrorism. Much like in a socialist system, everybody contributes to make sure that the whole is protected. Simple as that. Now, you can't use those words because they're bad words, and you certainly can't equate. But when you think about it from an economic system, the taxes you pay to protect the entire country, that would be no different than the taxes you pay to protect the entire country by having healthcare. And ultimately, if the military is about protecting the lives and way of life of the United States or any other country, that's wonderful, super cool, all for that. But you can say the same thing about universal healthcare, protecting the lives of citizens as well as the system of the country. There's actually fundamentally no difference, but the system doesn't want you to understand that. And I don't have any problem with saying that. And that's cool. Let's all pitch in to protect one another.
Yeah.
But let's not forget that if we're looking at national security, human welfare, universal healthcare, because the Defense Department does the exact same thing in its own way.
Oh, that's powerful. Yeah, there's so many things I'd like to go much deeper on, but I think that's a great place to end. And wow, thank you so much. It's been
Thanks so much.
an honor to sit down and get your opinion on these things. And I'm so glad that you're in charge of Green School here and the upper school, because the next generations, I think, are going to be the ones to be able to have these changes that we need to see and have that deep form of ethics that's so important to bring in what's needed in the new world. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.